Yes, great. I thought I would invite my glamorous assistant, as David called him, Pat Kane, who is actually the co-initiator of the alternative. So there's two of us, and we're going to kind of share this. We're going to try to get through this really fast because we're trying to embody, in a way, some of the principles that we're going to be introducing over the next 20 minutes. And move to having as much time as we can for discussion. So here we go. So the alternative as a project was begun to answer the question, if politics is broken, what's the alternative? Now, even that phrase, politics is broken, obviously is a cliche. People in the room would disagree whether it is or not. I'm going to take my reference point as the biggest event, let's say political event, that we've experienced together recently, which was Brexit. Brexit was, one might say, it was carried by a political party that had one member. So it was, in a sense, it was the vision of one MP that managed to change, in terms of politics, the destiny of the nation. And as a result, we've become divided. And this is something we're very familiar with, that politics leaves us divided. But in this case, it's become quite extreme. And one might say the whole idea of what it means to be British is in danger of disappearing down a bit of a black hole. We've become existentially extremely challenged. And that's one of the reasons we began this quest. If politics is broken, what's the alternative? So before that, before I started this project, I was working with a political think tank called Compass. Some of you may be aware of it. It's a left-leaning think tank which just recently gave rise to a political project called the Progressive Alliance. I worked with it for 10 years, and one of the last things I did there was to write a paper called Is the Party Over? I was beginning to look at how the political party worked and what its faults were and whether or not it was serving us well. And I'm just going to ask, first of all, in this room, how many of you are members of political parties? All right, so you're not at all a typical sample, because when I was doing this research, to my horror, I discovered, and I should have known this all along, that only 2% of people in this country are members of political parties. So that means 2% of the people are defining political discourse. 2% of the people are informing a media which one might say is codependent with this political bubble. And where does that leave the rest of us? It's a classic sense, I suppose, of the tail wagging the dog. Now, having experienced that, and having spent quite a lot of time, in fact, talking to people who voted to leave the UK, I was becoming increasingly aware of how different the conversation is outside of this political bubble. And I don't want you to underestimate it. You know, in this room, I've had many great ideas. I agree with many of them. Each one of them could give rise to a great conversation, and that will do in the future. But the conversation outside of the political bubble, it seems to me, once you try to extricate yourself from it, is really quite different, and different in all the important ways that we, I feel, need to become more and more aware of if we're not going to be consistently hijacked by the 98%. So one of the problems, I think, is that the media and politics itself often caricatures the 98% as apathetic. Somehow, maybe too lazy, maybe just disinterested, maybe I hear too often not smart enough to be involved in the political discussion as it is defined from the political bubble. But of course, if you spend any amount of time outside of the political bubble, physically in it, dissociating yourself from the media that supports it, what you find really is this incredible space of creativity, possibility, just a different existential experience from being inside it. So here we are, the 98% overflowing with thinking and ideas and projects. That little bubble on the right, by the way, is just a month's worth of startups in New York, just to give you an experience and a sense of what's going on. So Pat talked earlier on in his talk about the radical animal, about the shift or about the difference in thought about what is the human being. So I've heard it again, but I don't hear it too much from this community, but the way that the human being is really characterized within politics is homo economicus. Most of all, the most important thing is the tax, the penny in your pocket, the job, the roof over your head. This is how we measure or think about the human being. Of course, we know that that isn't the reality. It's not the reality for us in our personal lives. It's not the reality of how we talk with each other. We are complex individuals. I think a lot of people have given rise to this fact this morning. It's talked about, it's explored in the media, but when it comes to politics, it's not really counted. Is that the reason then that we face these kind of epidemics now that are draining our capacity to act politically the way we intend to, or to make improvements the way we imagine we could? Instead of that, we're facing epidemics of depression, addiction, loneliness. These are the realities of our society. Right at the core of this is a lack of understanding about the emotional needs and a lack of a politics that really seeks to meet those emotional needs. Now, when people think about emotional needs, they tend to think about happiness, sadness. In fact, there's a huge industry around happiness. But in fact, if you look at it from a scientific point of view, our emotional needs are the nourishment that we need to become fully functioning human beings. So these ones here that I've outlined here are the ones that are identified by the Human Givens School of Psychotherapy. I'm a psychotherapist. And I'll just rattle them off. The real emotional needs include attention, status, belonging, autonomy, security, achievement, privacy, meaning and purpose, intimacy. If we're not helping people to get these needs met, we are beginning to move into a dysfunctional society. Of course, as you are probably aware, the consumer society has done a very good job of getting these needs met over the past 50 years or so. And in fact, the advertising industry has targeted these needs and has given, therefore, created the context within which our businesses can operate. However, these are always short-term meetings of these needs. We can buy something, we can get our need temporarily met, and then the cycle begins again. We're currently being shaped by not getting these emotional needs met.
Okay, so that's the first thing that we want to look at in terms of politics, and the alternative is that we don't have, as I made the point I made before, and just backed up, a rich and complex enough view of human nature, certainly beyond homo economicus, but into a whole wide range of areas. The second thing I think that we think a new politics should look at, and that we, under the concept of the alternative, we should be exploring, is that the 98% beyond the 2% political and media bubble want to do power differently. They want to do power differently. Our experience of it, I think, generally is mostly top-down, and it's stating the obvious here, but we have this weird voting system which doesn't reflect our vote properly. In fact, it's atrocious in terms of how it reflects our numerical vote. We have manifestos that are written by political insiders, not citizens. And what have we got for that? What's the result of us subjecting ourselves to that particular arrangement? Distorted structure of democracy. We have a burning planet, a dangerously divided society and world. Brexit, under these circumstances, should not have been a surprise. But as we say, it's this massive refocusing that we want you to think about when you think about the 2% and the 98%, because beyond the 2%, there's so much experiment and initiative going on. People, to coin a phrase, people are taking control of their lives in a multitude of ways. They're doing more than just protesting. They are organising themselves, and not simply against the stuff they don't like, though there's plenty of that as well, but in practical, pragmatic, constructive ways to answer problems and needs. And part of what we're about is casting a net out to have this constituency see themselves and recognise themselves. So these are, up and down the country, independents are storming the local moribund councils with their usual polarities of parties and reviving them. Flat pack democracy is a great example of that. There are people who are being literally revolutionary about food, energy and land, the whole tradition of eco-activism, but that pans out to protesting against fracking or transition towns or whole new food systems. And this in the process makes communities resilient and self-sufficient in an everyday way, not necessarily with a big ticket led by a big politician, but by response to local conditions and by availing themselves of the tools that come through communication networks. Or just, as I said before and connected back to my previous presentation, just creative projects which shift consciousness and get people to look at stuff in a new way. This is a great ambition, I think, for lots of people in arts and culture, is that they want to find a way to have their capacity to shift consciousness one way or another, have a social effect, and they're part of the process as well. So as a result of this 98% ferment, communities get stronger on the inside. They feel stronger, they feel more capable, because the diversity of their consciousness and the richness of their human nature is being diversed by a diversity of endeavours, and they truly gain control and security, but also in the process of having autonomy fully expressed, richly expressed in their lives, they get meaning and purpose as well. So there is a view of the 98%, which is that it's this, by virtue of people acting authentically and bringing others into that space to act with them, there's a huge political energy there waiting to be tapped. Okay.
So, thirdly, the 98% relates to the globe in a much more, open and querulous way, maybe, than the 2% allows. So, politics and the media view the world as a tricky place to negotiate. Other countries are either with us or against us. We're always looking outwards in a competitive or survivalist state of mind. It's confusing, especially when we know that globalization is more to do with multinationals stitching up the global economy, and we're all victims to that, even the US and the UK. So, at this point, globalization is being blamed for everything, and there is a logic. I'm speaking now from the logic of the 98%. So there is a logic to that. We understand that, how globalization has driven down wages. And we see it, it appears to us as flows of people, and us not being able to manage that. But this is also in contradiction to something else that we feel naturally is expressed in our daily lives, which is probably two things about the globe that aren't really properly integrated into our politics, which is a sense of the desire to be part of the planet, to be able to protect the planet. And more than that, that the globe itself has become a place that we freely roam in. Because of technology, and I think that anybody here who has a child will know that they've been born now into a world where the globe is not an outside space at all. It's kind of an inside space. It's somewhere that we can access quickly and easily. It's something that we're constantly in communication with. Again, these are sort of existential shifts that we're all experiencing now that are somehow in contradiction to this sense that the globe is outside of us. So this is a real challenge for politics, to be able to help people be of this world, be able to own and be responsible for this world, while still at the same time being able to manage this age of corporate multinationals and globalization, which has somehow victimized us. How are we going to be able to integrate those thoughts and views? At the moment, we're not managing to do that. So what we're proposing and what we've identified by being in this conversation outside of the usual political discourse is that there's a natural sense that the complexity of the human being, the one that we experience every day, is somehow connected to our agency in our local community, how we are able to experience power, and how that then impacts upon the world. What we're calling inside the alternative the I-we world. Being able to reorientate politics around this sense of the interconnectivity of the I, the we, the world, which has an impact on our own well-being. It's significant for how we manage power, and then it has an impact on the world outside of us. This, in a way, is the reorientation that we're trying to achieve.
Okay. There's two other things that we've noticed about 2% politics, which is contradicted by the experience of the 98%. Firstly, so much doom and gloom about the future coming from the media politics complex. This is no news to this room, but should we really be reacting to automation simply with fear about the loss of jobs? Or can the case be made that lots of people will be liberated from monotony and alienation as a way to spend their whole lives there? And one of the things about network/communication society is that it just generates uncomfortable, annoying, irritatingly attractive multitudes of ideas about how a society with more time could flourish. There really is no shortage of stuff to be getting on with a political economy that rests technology into a particular relation to human flourishing. It really, the leisure problem really isn't a problem. I think we know that by now. Genetic engineering, we're talking about being scared of the future. Is it about scary designer babies, or as David would say, is it about health and quality of older lives? Artificial intelligence, is it only about being manipulated by algorithms, or can we all use data to help us make very complex decisions faster? What we're trying to do here with the alternative is to throw out pretty crude metaphors, but which might also be motivating metaphors, which might orient action, which might make citizens feel as if they can act. So let's not be blind to the dangers of the technology we're seeing in the alternative, but let's not miss out on the fruits of human ingenuity. What a shame and what a waste that would be in terms of the dynamic that we're facing, and what a political opportunity if it can be grasped.
So last but not least, probably the most important thing, is that politics requires a visceral change. It needs to feel different. Until now, I mean, I know I did stand to be an MP at one point. I lived a long life on the left of politics, sat in many smoke-filled rooms. And I looked at the internet yesterday looking for pictures of political meetings, and they were all like this. It was all about sitting down, and I know that within those rooms, a lot of talking and shouting. When I met the Alternative for the first time in Denmark, which is a political party which is a new political party, been going for 3 years, and they have proportional representation, so it makes sense there, fastest growing party with 9 seats. It was a viscerally different experience. They never meet without dancing. It's always an issue of relationship. It's always an issue of communication. And people in the room feel that they own what they're doing. So, very briefly, I thought it was going to be faster. The Alternative UK was launched exactly 6 months ago, yesterday.
Yes.
What we've been doing over the 6 months is 3 things, very briefly. Firstly, we've launched the Daily Alternative.
Yeah.
Would you like to say something
Anybody
about
trying
that?
to do a daily blog? Can I see some furrowed brows? It's quite a commitment, and particularly if you're trying to map 98% of purposeful, meaningful, political and cultural activity that doesn't exist within the media bubble, but we've been doing it for 6 months. I really would urge you to have a look at it. There's a great word cloud, there's lots of great tagging, but just the very act of doing it is you feel as if you are literally journalising a snoosphere. So I would, if you're not doing it yourself and you want to define a domain and a sensibility, do a daily blog under a concept. It's a bracing, demanding, but incredibly enriching experience in terms of giving you a map of a certain reality.
So each day a new alternative.
Yeah.
The second thing we'll be doing is doing what we call creating the network of networks. There are many, many people trying to do what we're trying to do. And what we're trying to do is connect them up. So for the last 6 months, we've been working with these projects, appearing in their events, they've been appearing in ours. It's a growing sense of a resource for a new politics. And finally...
Yeah. And finally, I said earlier on in one of our presentations that the idea of inventing new institutions, organisations, processes, social ways of being together and acting that respond to the dynamic of the future is very important, and that's what we're trying to do. Borrowing from Alternative in Denmark, we're running what we call political laboratories up and down the UK. The intent of these, they're kind of combinations of convivial events, political discussions, artistic performances, hack spaces, and we want these laboratories to be crucibles for this new politics, this politics that combines ideas and viscerality, body and concept, technology and emotion. We're going to throw it all into these laboratories as a crucible, and we're going to track it, document it, connect other people up with laboratories around about the country, and see if we can birth this new politics.
That's us.
And that's us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, why do you need to have a political party for this?
Well, we're a political platform, which is a different thing from a political party. A party could exist on a political platform, and the model for this is what Alternative are doing in Denmark. They are forged by a guy called Uffe Elbæk, who created something called Chaos Pilots, which some of you might have heard of. But he's essentially a very vibrant social entrepreneur and politician, and he sees the Alternative there as a platform in which there could be a political party, a publishing house, a solar power company, a publishing company. But the point is that they adhere to the values of the Alternative, which are sort of 6 values, which I can't remember at the moment, but I'm sure Indra will help me in a minute, and 3 domains, which is generally democracy, sustainability and empathy. But on that platform, a variety of things can happen that respond to the diversity of ways in which people are being political, i.e. dealing with power, either to get power or to resist against other people's powers, from the 98%. So to think about political platform and the political party is to think about a much more vibrant process than just the scary idea of a political party.
You mentioned the political laboratories. What's the best outcome so far from one of your political laboratories?
Well, it may seem really obvious. We did a political laboratory in Eastbourne. We asked people to talk about what they felt that they needed from a politics, and then they were in groups and they tried to address what their own town might need. And in that conversation, almost across the room actually, but in various different forms, it turned out the problem they were trying to address most in Eastbourne was loneliness. And so once that was up and out there and people were hearing each other saying that, it gave rise to a lot of different kinds of projects than they might otherwise have been trying to address, really practical things that they could do to meet that problem.
But also macro as well, because we have a thing called we create something called a living manifesto, which is obviously like a dead manifesto. But the whole idea is that through these laboratories we will surface new policy. And I think it's an interesting thing to think about policy rather than party.
And have you got new policy?
Well, one of the consequences of these Eastbourne discussions is, well, what's your macro response to this? So what would a Ministry of Connection be, or a Ministry of Human Connection be? Now that sounds like a slightly starry-eyed idea, but think it through. If the experience of a very atomising, privatising society is loneliness, then what would be the collective macro response? And when we had an advertising guy who, from Phil Tier from Brothers and Sisters, who did a sell job on UBI, and it was funny, it was ribald, it was sexy, it was provocative, and that's the kind of thing we want to be trying to bring into the laboratories, different disciplines, creative disciplines, and open those toolboxes out to citizens rather than just creative or business elites. There's so much facilitatory technology out there. We want to bring that into the centre of politics as well.
Any questions from the floor?
Okay. I mean, how much time have we got, David?
About 2 minutes.
Okay. All right, you're lucky you're going to get away with not having to stand up and dance.
This might sound slightly flippant, but do you think that the alt-right in the States might have hijacked the term alternative for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And, we are using the term alternative mostly because we met the Alternative Party in Denmark and we saw the logic of it. And then very quickly people said to us, what about the alt-right, And then we thought to ourselves, well, do we just abandon ship and leave the alternative to the alt-right? And we thought, no, we'll have to stay and contest this. Because that question, if politics is broken, what is the alternative, has to stay open for a while. And what's happening at the moment is exactly what could happen with technology, which is that, and in a political space in a social space where people are not getting their emotional needs met, is that people's emotions are being hijacked. So that at the moment looks as a very good alternative, and we have to contest it in the space.
Question here?
My question is around scalability, and what have you experienced of being able to create laboratories, political laboratories, in lots of places simultaneously, because you can't do that top down.
Yeah, I mean, this is a good question for us. I'll have a go at it first, and you can add anything you want to do. Sure. But I don't know if you're familiar with flat pack democracy. So flat pack democracy is actually the term that describes what happened in Frome, the people who seized back control of their council and are now a group of independents. It's a beautiful example of how people's needs got met and how they now feel that they're in charge of something, they're in charge of a budget, etc. People always come to them and say, how do we scale this up? And their response is always the same, which is, we don't want to scale it up, we want to do what we're doing. We're not trying to take control of the rest of this region. So then it becomes a question of how does it actually cause change? And the way we're looking at it is that when something becomes a really good example of itself, that delivers emotionally, it delivers relationship, it delivers the things that people seem to be yearning for, it gets copied, right? So now there's, 3,000 flat pack democracy books out there being read and devoured by other people. There are 15 active projects on the go that are flat pack projects, and that includes in Europe. This is the age of the internet. People sense things, they hear about things, they copy them. It's not for a centralized organization or politics anymore to say, we will adopt that idea and now you over here have to do it the same. It's now more to do with get to the thing you want to get to, and one of my subjects as a journalist is soft power. It's the power of attraction now that is making things, have impact.
And it's a politics
if we're quick, we can get one more question and answer.
Just it's a politics of models and toolkits. If you look at the way the TEDx distributes a toolkit, make your locality make a TEDx, and there's a certain collective endeavour there. There's a thing called Fun Palaces, which we would direct you to, which is about bringing science and arts together on a weekend in October, once every year. So it's what distributed practice, and we call our daily alternative a box of tools and tales. So I think that is a politics, distributing great practice, distributing toolboxes, that's getting people to perform those toolboxes into a central network space. That's the practice of politics.
Thank you for your talk. Do you think eventually we will have a society that understands that creativity is the foundation of schooling and not academia, as it's just a branch, because creativity encompasses everything?
Sure. Well, I think
yes.
What I just talked about is what used to be, what was workers' education? No, but what was workers' education in the 19th and early 20th century? What were the left book clubs and the film clubs? When the miners, the landlocked miners created the first library, why were they doing that? You know, so I think we're not in that situation. We're in an informational, creative situation, and I think we're beginning to forge new educational, self-educational, social educational processes. But do we call them education? Is an interesting question. You know, what's the name for that? Educari, to bring it out of you. There could be completely, not institutes but constitutes. I can give you a whole set of neologisms around about that. But I think that partly what we're doing is about creating spaces within which people can reorient themselves vis-a-vis the information age and can value creativity in their lives. But you have to create spaces within that can be generated and crucible. Yes, but if we don't get out there with ideas into communities, that reorientation won't happen.
Evans Province, to be very quick with another question.
The political party concept was introduced centuries ago, usually based on doctors, to solve very complex problems. There's now, I believe, a much better way of doing it. It also is very interesting. I urge everyone in this room to read a book called The End of Politicians, written by Brett Henning. He's speaking at Conway Hall on March the 4th. I believe that was the future.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Futures as well, I guess.
All right.
End of politicians. End of politicians.
Or we are all politicians.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the alternative, Indra, Pat, thank you very much.
Thank you.